It is Christmas, which gives us an opportunity just to mess with the service a little bit this morning. So we're going to do a couple of things ever so slightly differently. You have a children's choir coming up very soon, which are going to be awesome. And what we've decided to do is just chart a little bit of the Christmas story and the Christmas hope throughout our sermon, our service this morning. What we're doing as we begin this series about Christmas, and our Christmas series this year is looking through Christmas and even beyond to think about how Christmas fulfills hope, about how Christmas was expected, about how what it was that God was doing brought around something of fulfillment and fruition to what people had been hoping for. We look back on the Christmas story and rehearse it, but the place of this story and the way this story is told is often told by people who were looking forward, waiting for when it was that God was going to answer us. Now, so what we're going to do this morning is Bobby and myself and Adam at 3 different points in the service are going to speak to you about some of the prophetic hope around Jesus from the book of Isaiah. But also we want to tell some stories throughout this morning, and 3 stories are going to be told to you just on the screens. And I'd like to invite you just to watch the screens and hear the first story this morning.
I think Christmas means to me hope. My whole life I dreamt of being a mother. I thought about it often as a young child and growing up through my adolescence. I thought of what it would look like, what it would feel like to be a mom, what my life would look like as a mom. And now that I am a mom, I can say that it looks almost nothing like I thought it was going to look. You know, I've got 2 special needs kids, and nothing in our life is very typical. And oftentimes we miss out on a lot of stuff, and life can look a little messy. But my children have a deep connection with Christmas. Our home just feels so much extra, filled with joy, and it's actually a chance where I get to see my children be excited and joyful in a lot of ways like the other kids are excited and joyful. And it's a chance for us to kind of feel a little bit normal, I think. I've had my times where I've railed against God and felt so frustrated because those prayers weren't always being answered in the way I was expecting them to be, and that foundation started to crack a little. And so this faith that I thought I had in this God that answered all my prayers was no longer there. So I had to learn to get to know a character of a God that is good when he answers prayers, and he's good when he answers miracles, and when he moves mountains for you. But most importantly, I got to know a God that is really, really good when he still doesn't answer your prayers the way you want. To get to know a God that is still good in those times brings us the most joy.
Isaiah writes in chapter 40 of his book, "Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins." A voice of one calling, "In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain. And the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together." Isaiah writes to a piece of Israel's history, a long stretch of trouble in their life, where they were, as a community, as a people, as a nation, they find themselves suffering, they find themselves in punishment, they find themselves in exile, separated from family, separated from home, separated from identity, from control of their own lives. They find themselves separated from what they see as God's promises in their lives. And for 39 chapters of Isaiah, we see elements of the reality of this situation, of this divided nation, of this conquered nation, figuring out what is God saying to us about this. And oftentimes, because of their waywardness, the message isn't positive. But then at the beginning of chapter 40, God reveals and pulls back another aspect of his policy. At some level, you might say it like this: the government of heaven roll out the future plans that they have, and the plans begin with the word comfort. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Perhaps at this time of year, it's interesting for us, with all of our different perspectives of what God is like, the policy of heaven is comfort. God's attitude towards his people is positive. He is for us, not against us. And for many of us, as our story of our lives unfold, we hear words constantly talked about in church about a God who is for us, not against us. And it's so easy for us to say, well, I believe that for other people, but I might be that one person in history about whom God is against. Because if you saw how my life was going, surely God is not for me. And the Israelites relate to your story. They relate to being far from home, to life not working out the way that they intended it to be. And yet here we see into God's plan for the future, a plan of comfort, a plan of drawing people into this gracious God who reveals his glory in a comforting way. But how will God do this? And then in the midst of these verses, we find out how God's going to go about enacting this plan of comfort. With verses that perhaps, if you've read the Gospels before, verses that feel familiar. In verse 3 of chapter 40, we hear about a voice of one calling. And what does it call? In the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, every mountain and hill made low. The rough ground shall become level, and the rugged places a plain. How is God going to bring comfort to his people? He's going to build a road. The voice announces this super highway across the desert, this road that's going to carve its way through the wilderness for God's people to come home. Now, highways in the world of empires are always important. If you remember your history lessons from school, when you become an empire, one of the important things you do is build roads. You think about it, all roads lead to Rome, we say, because the Roman Empire were such good road builders. The reason they built these roads so much is because they wanted to get their armies around their empire quickly. If you're going to defend an empire, you need to be able to move your army quickly. The Romans did this, and empires throughout history have did this. Even into our recent history, you'll notice the Third Reich of Germany in the 1930s built roads, big, wide roads, to move the military along. But look closely at this road that God is building. This highway is not a highway along which God will send conquering armies, but this highway is big through the wilderness because God's bringing people home. It's not a highway to send out destruction, but it's a highway to gather the lost and the desolate and the homeless and the downtrodden and the aliens and the foreigners and bring them all back together again. This is not how empires normally build highways, but this is how God does. And then we see this vision in this prophet, and the prophets are always, and you'll see this throughout this morning, carving these beautiful poetic images, these pictures of us that help us understand what it is that God's trying to do. And we see an insight into the relentless God and his relentless road that he's going to bring to gather us all home. The prophet imagines a construction project from the future. Valleys will be raised up. Mountains will be laid low. It's not lost on me that our position as a church is right next to a road construction project going on at the moment. And we watch the effort that goes in with modern machinery, with modern equipment, how much effort it takes to build a road alongside another road. This is not a road in the desert. This is not a road in the wilderness. This is a road beside a road. So we already know we can build roads there. We already know how to do it. We've built roads before. But it's noisy, it's loud. For the first time in recent history, we're not the people that most annoy the condos the other side of our parking lot. Noise and effort and expense and cost. But Isaiah is writing this in an era where they didn't have earth-moving machinery. They didn't have drills and diggers and trucks and all of that finance. And yet still he imagines a relentless God who will flatten mountains, who will fill in valleys, and who will build a highway through the desert because he wants his people to come home. The coming home of our God, the coming home of his people, bringing us back together. This is a messianic road. Because how God's going to do that is told and worked out in the story of Christmas. All four Gospels notice how significant Isaiah 40 is into the story of Jesus. Because God's making a way, and along that way we find a Messiah who tells us the road is open, who tells us the highway is toll-free, and we can just walk down it and be brought back into the company of our God. A homecoming for the alien, a homecoming for the foreigner, or the dislocated, or the downtrodden, or the ignored. What's your wilderness this Christmas? What's the wilderness that you find yourself stood on the other side of? The wilderness that you find yourself looking over, saying there's no way through there. The message from Isaiah throughout history to us is God is building roads where you can't imagine them. God is building pathways, super highways that flatten all the obstacles because he wants us to come home. And somewhere inside us at Christmas time, I wonder if the resonance we have with this Christmas story actually comes from this fact and this fact alone. We know there's a God out there who's calling us home. Frederick Buechner said it like this in his beautiful book, Longing for Home. No matter how much the world shatters us to pieces, we carry inside us a vision of wholeness that we sense is our true home and that beckons us. The world shatters us to pieces. Life crunches us down into gravel sometimes. But inside us is this hope. And the church speaks to this hope constantly throughout the year, but at Christmas, maybe we lay it a little more bare. We have this vision of a rescuer who came to bring wholeness, who came to put us back together. Christmas ended the wait to see a relentless God move heaven and earth to make a way for us to return to him. And that's the message we want to talk about this morning.
Christmas to me means the words love, peace, and joy. I had spent many years building an image, a false image of security, stability, and self-confidence. I seemed to have it all going for me. I had a successful oil and gas career. I had the condo downtown. I had traveled the world and friends, and I kind of had a reputation as the party girl too, though. I had fallen into a world of drug addiction and alcohol abuse, and these were my ways of coping with my misery. I did go away to an addiction recovery facility for 3 months. And when I got back from that, I had several more months of secular counseling and therapy. But I still felt empty. I still was wondering what was wrong with me. And during that time as well was the mass layoffs in the oil and gas industry, and I was one of those thousands to lose my job. So now I was unemployed. But then I remembered this strange feeling I felt at Westside that summer before. So I started coming to Sunday services, and hearing the worship music, I sat in the crowd and would cry as the word soaked into my heart. And then a rabid curiosity was born, and little did I know I was building a new life centered around God. And within a few months, Jesus revealed himself to me. He said to me, Lisa, I am the love of your life. I am the one you've been seeking all these years. And he did. He filled my heart. He pushed out all the anxiety, all the depression, and he was able to help restore my broken relationship with my mom and dad. I moved home to be with them, to care for them in their elderly years, and I was able to tell my mom how much I loved her and hold her hands as she died, and Jesus took her home. And so those words, love, peace, and joy, have tangible meaning to me now. Jesus gave me the gift of love for my broken heart. He gave me the gift of peace for my anxiety and confusion, and he gave me joy for all my sadness. And that's what Christmas means to me.
Love came down at Christmas. It's amazing when we look at the text that we're moving forward in. Isaiah 42 says this, "Here is my servant, whom I uphold. My chosen one in whom I delight, I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his teaching, the islands will put their hope. Isaiah 42 is a beautiful text for us as we look forward to the kind of Messiah that God will send. Like the purest beauty behind a gift. I know for many of you, right now there's just a little bit of stress around the right thing for this right person. It's got to be the right gift, the right card, the right wrapping. They've given suggestions, which I'm not quite sure how that works in the idea of gift. But the reason the pressure's there is because it tells a lot about you. It speaks of your relationship. We learn so much from the person, the giver, and God shapes out a vision of how he will be going about doing what he said he was going to do. And of course, the text looks even further down the road when we think about how not only he is going to be, but how we are to be as the church. This gift is for all. This gift of his Son as delivered to us, now we have the responsibility of also delivering this gift. Think about this for just a moment. You can be doing what is right, and you can be doing it with very good intentions, but you can be doing it in a bad way. We can be wrong in our rightness. Some of us are here today because somewhere along the journey of church world, it went wrong. Something was broken. In fact, even though I would say that we're generally perfect here at Westside King's Church, even we can get it wrong as well. It's interesting. I know you'd find this hard to believe, but some of us, even as staff that have been in church a long time, we have been hurt by church. Jesus is called to bring about justice, but to do it with care of those who are broken, those who are damaged. Somehow those that life has brought bruising and hurt and pain. He says in the text, the bruised reed and the smoldering wick. How are you doing at this task of delivering this gift that you have received from God to others? How are you doing? When it's a new opportunity to show this beautiful love of God's perfect Son, this beautiful baby, when you get to show that love to a stranger, maybe you're like me. You're just at your best. It's your A game. You are the first one in to share the light of Jesus to somebody who's asking questions, someone who is broken, someone who is hurt. A smoldering wick, a broken reed. It's here that we can deliver Jesus easily. Then we move a little further down the road into our connection group to those who are still struggling, who have heard the message of Jesus before. And it's here where it gets a little bit more complicated. I don't know why, because when I speak, my words are exactly like Jesus, smooth and perfect and magical. Yet I have to share the stories again and tell them the same pieces over and over. And suddenly I find myself distracted and frustrated and maybe a little harsh in my delivery. Jesus says that we have to be around this special group, this group who are hurting, who are broken. Those that are new and those that are even newer. But what about the other group? I don't know if you're looking at your calendar, but it's just a few days, and those closest to you are gathering right now to put up a few days of lodging in your house. It's here where maybe the highest amount of stress is coming to minister to those who are broken or hurting. They're the ones who are closest to us. They've watched us, we've walked together, but they are still broken and bruised. This gift is for all. Those who are new to the message for the very first time, and those who are near and have been around the message for a long time. And we are both the receiver of this gift, but also the giver. This practice of truth and care, it is not an easy task. So what do? How do we do it? We must be committed to the truth. We must be committed to what God has called us to be, but we must practice the truth with care. And this Christmas story shows us how Jesus put into practice this coming as a baby, this prime picture of vulnerability. And through this image, even the forward imaging of the cross, somehow we are seeing how God works. Walter Brueggemann says it this way: practice vulnerability. And be attentive to others who are vulnerable, bruised reeds and smoldering wicks. The prophet's vision of the Messiah is a formative piece for us as the church. The world takes advantage of the vulnerable. So how do we be a community where the bruised reeds are broken and the smoldering wicks are not stuffed out? Our conversations, our actions, our invitations, whether inside the building or outside the building, shape who we are as a community. How do I do it? 2 pieces: taking time and talking. Taking time and talking. Yesterday, in the process of needing speaker wire, not able to wait for Santa's helpful encouragement on Christmas morning, I went to God's opportunity, which is Kijiji in the Greek. Magically, God provided a source in a man called Greg. He had a spool 250 feet. The price was amazing. And he said, I can meet you after I pop by to visit my mom at Foothills. My reply said, thanks. Looking forward to meet you. Then suddenly things changed, and I read you his text when he did not show. Hey, Bobby, it's Greg with the speaker wire. Sorry, my brain was mush this afternoon and tonight. My mom was moved to ICU, and I spent the last 4 hours with her, and I just got home. My reply back: sorry about your mom. Was this an illness? Was it a surprise? I will be praying for you and for your mother. Of course, I did the right thing after I met him yesterday. I lowballed him on the price and then invited him to church on Christmas Eve. Some of you are laughing, but you know that's bad behavior. We sat at the Flames community rink as he's roughing hockey. We just sat in the aisle for a minute. And I pulled the card, the only one and the best one we have. I just said, Greg, how's mom? He gave me a little download. She's not responding right now. And I said, I'm a minister at a church, not just a guy that needs wire. Is there any way that I can serve you, your dad, or your mom? Any way. I will keep praying, but if there's just any way I can serve you. Brueggemann says, practice vulnerability. In the middle of busyness, in the middle of contractors, practice vulnerability and be attentive to others who are vulnerable, bruised reeds and smoldering wicks. I'll leave you with this. If you're willing to practice, God will always bring opportunities. His joy in sending Jesus is our joy in sharing him to those new, those who have never heard the story, those who are around us, who are near and have heard it many times. So today, we light the greatest candle, the candle of joy. The joy that each one of us have felt and sorted like Lisa. The joy candle, that hope at the end of brokenness. And right here was where we celebrated her mom's passing and the beauty of reconciliation between a daughter and a mother.
Christmas to me has a whole new meaning in a very deep and meaningful way, because my baby is in heaven. On May 1st, 2015, we learned that Natasha had a brain tumor growing in the stem of her brain called DIPG brain cancer. And she had that tumor growing and lived another 15 months before she went to the Lord on August 4th, 2016. But she said to me, just out of the blue, blurted out, "Mom, we are going to be together forever." And when she told me that, I just my jaw just dropped. Like, where did that wisdom come from, that the timing of it, and how God uses those words over and over again to minister to me. Christmas, in terms of, what it represents, when we get this present, when someone gives you a present, you receive it, you don't know what's inside, but you open it up and you unbundle it, and that's where you discover what it is that you've received. And in that enfolded is the promise of what God has given me. My Natasha's not dead. My Natasha's living in heaven. And she's alive, and she's more alive than we can even begin to imagine. She has the full understanding and the full picture, and it's wrapped up in that present. And I just have a desire for others to know that, because I have on the top of my fireplace a sign that I painted on old barnwood that says of a promise that God gave me through this all. And he said that the joy of the Lord is my strength, my passion, that while I'm here on earth, I want to be a light giver. I want to show people God's light, because one day we will be together forever.
The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you've shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle, every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. As we've walked this morning through various promises in the ancient book of Isaiah to the people of Israel and Judah, this one is one that they held on to white-knuckled. This was a promise for the people in their darkest season to carry them through and sustain them through centuries of slavery, exile, and oppression. Because you see, for the people of Israel and Judah, the messianic hope is not the sentimental religious platitude that we've often made of Christmas. Actually, for the people of Israel, ancient Israel, it's a concrete hope. It's a hope that actually doesn't just speak to one season in the year. Actually, it speaks to every aspect of their concrete, everyday, flesh and blood lives. The context out of which Isaiah writes Isaiah 9 is that the people of Judah are looking to the horizon and they can see the armies of Assyria coming to get them. Everywhere they look, they seem surrounded on the margins by oppression creeping in right from the horizon. And that's why we can't really understand the impact and the significance of Isaiah 9, which might be a chapter that we know very well, especially around this time of year, without understanding first Isaiah 8. Isaiah 8 is this incredible warning that Isaiah gives to the people of Israel to say, the people of Assyria are coming. And there's two ways that you can live through this moment in your history. You can live through it by holding on to the messianic promise, or you can live through it by trying to hold on to other things. And if you don't hold on to the promise of God coming to you, this is what will happen. Consult God's instruction and the testimony of warning. If anyone doesn't speak according to this word, they have no light of dawn. Distressed and hungry, they'll roam through the land. When they're famished, they'll become enraged. And looking upward will curse their king and their God. Then they will look toward the earth and see only distress and only darkness and only fearful gloom. There's probably been moments in all of our lives at some point in which you look around yourself for some small measure of hope, but instead all you see is distress. All you see is darkness and fear and gloom. There's other times in our lives where something might be going terribly wrong, but at least not everything's going wrong, and we can focus on these other pieces. But then there's other times, maybe fewer and further between, in which everywhere you look, it feels like darkness. And maybe for you, those moments were big, shattering moments like Saskia's that we heard about in the video, or maybe they're small moments all piling up on top of each other and creating a big moment. But either way, you know that experience of looking around you and feeling like the pain is all there is. The darkest seasons of life, for whatever reason, have a way of taking over everything else, don't they? The dark moments of our lives have a way of feeling totalizing, feeling absolute. Do you ever try to compartmentalize your life? So you say, okay, yeah, my marriage or my relationship is suffering, but I don't bring that to work with me. I don't let that affect my everyday work. Or you say, hey, I don't have work. Maybe you lost your job, or maybe you're struggling to find work, but you say, I don't let my kids see that part of me. I don't let my kids see that deep down, actually, I'm suffering. If you've walked through any kind of mental health concerns, or you know people who have, then you'll know that that feeling of anxiety and depression and stress and fear is not just one box in your life that you can pretend isn't there. Actually, it lays heavy on every part of your life, and it feels totalizing. And what we try to do often is we try to compartmentalize. We put our pain in a little box and we try to hide it away in the closet and pretend that that's not going on. And that can actually work for a while, but ultimately that experience will spill over. Ultimately, the box will break and it will begin to feel like that darkness is actually all there is. You see, it's into that kind of a space, into that kind of an experience, the experience of the people of Assyria moving in at the margins, darkness creeping in from the horizon, that Isaiah speaks this incredible promise of the Messiah coming to the people of Judah. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. It's an amazing hope. It's an amazing promise that probably at varying times all of us need to hear. And yet in that promise, wrapped up in that gift, is something unexpected, something strange. You see, held in that promise, we hear something of the strange, peculiar, upside-down shape that our hope takes as Jesus followers. See, all of us in our darker moments want some kind of change that is total. Nobody wants a half measure of change for the problems in their lives, that just fix a little bit of it, but leave enough so that I can still live quite chaotically and try to find some balance. No, we want a radical transformation. We don't want half measures. We want a change that is as total as the experience of darkness is right now. That if God's coming and he's stepping onto the scene, it means everything is going to change. And Israel had exactly that kind of hope. They'd taken this messianic hope and promise, but instead they'd shaped it in the form of nationalism, in the form of sovereignty, that they figured if God's coming to us, then it means he's going to make us strong and powerful, just like the nations that have oppressed us for all these centuries. He's going to give the nation back to Israel. It says in Isaiah, he's going to shatter the yoke that oppresses. The boots and the weapons of war will all be thrown into the fire. It's this glorious vision, but then the promise takes an unexpected shape, because he says, for to us a child is born. To us a son is given. See, they're promised great change, that this totalizing experience of darkness will give way to light and be defeated. But the shape that that hope takes is not glorious, and it's not victorious, and it's not a sweeping change and reform in their lives. It's something as small and seemingly insignificant as a child. Imagine the incredible mystery of Christmas, that the outpouring of the life of God into our lives and the life of the world takes the frame of the smallest, frailest thing that you can imagine. Maybe we can call it embryonic faith, that there was a moment 2,000 years ago in history in which the hope of God's coming to us was as small as an embryo. It's not what we're looking for, is it? And yet somehow in this, it tells us about the radically odd shape of Christian hope. It tells us about the subversive way that the people of God process their darkness and process their broken, difficult, painful moments. It tells us about the kind of things that we find value in, the kind of places in which we find our comfort. Because if the promise of hope coming to us comes in the shape and form of a child, then maybe the promise is that it's precisely in these small, fragile, insignificant things that the overwhelming darkness of our lives and our world is extinguished. I've always thought it's quite a strange thing that every year at Christmas, to celebrate this season of Advent, we celebrate it with the lighting of a candle. You ever thought about how strange that is? That the way that we recollect and rehearse our hope and our joy and peace and our comfort, the big story of God bursting into history and changing everything, we celebrate that by lighting something as small and fragile as a candle. It's strange. It doesn't really speak of how profound and huge this moment in history is, does it? And yet maybe the reason we do that is because within it is a profound promise that this is exactly what God is like. Let me explain it this way. If we were to put all the lights out, and sometimes I worry that might just happen accidentally once we've plugged all these Christmas trees in, but let's see what happens. If it does, I didn't plan that, all right? If we were to put all the lights out, turn the screens off, turn off any blinking electronic devices, that darkness would be pretty deep, a pretty penetrating darkness, because we're in a curling rink, so in case you haven't noticed, there's no light of day in here, all artificial in case you hadn't looked up. And yet, no matter how deep that darkness is, it would have no power to do anything to the light of one of those candles. Not one would be affected in the slightest by the deepest, most profound darkness. And somehow, that is what the kingdom of God is like. Somehow, the kingdom of God is like a dark, dark world, a deep darkness in which you look around and all you see is darkness, distress, and gloom, and yet it's broken by the flickering of a single candle. Somehow, the kingdom of God is like the long silence of God, broken by the cry of a single human baby. These things that are so seemingly small and insignificant and even fragile, standing against all the brokenness in our world. And somehow in God's reversed upside down economy, it's in these strange and unexpected forms that we find our subversive Christian hope. It reminds me of the promise held in the coming of Christ to us at Christmas. This Christ child that we celebrate. As John opens his gospel, we're talking about the heavenly story behind Jesus' coming. He echoes the words of Isaiah 9, and he does it on purpose. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not, cannot, will not overcome it. You heard a little bit from Saskia's story on the video there about losing her young daughter Natasha to cancer just last year. I actually had the privilege of meeting Natasha. Natasha came over to Westside one Sunday. Now, I hadn't heard her at this point. Her journey through cancer would actually go on to create a huge influence around the world. She became an international advocate for research into childhood cancer, especially DIPG cancer. She spoke at TED Talks, local TED Talks, at festivals, on TV. She was actually incredibly well known. And yet I had the privilege of meeting Natasha when she came to Westside one Sunday. She had just been diagnosed. She came right up to the stage after I'd finished teaching, and Bobby and I put our arms around her and prayed for her. Now, the reason I tell you that is because Natasha, as I said, went on to leave a profound legacy in the short 15 months that she wrestled with her cancer. But when I met her, she was just a child. She was young, shy, unsure, and obviously extremely afraid. And yet in the long journey that she had through cancer, she never ever lost her hope. I remember Natasha as a girl who was afraid, but deeply, deeply hopeful. See, there's something about the kingdom of God that is not predicated on strength and power and influence and the capacity to stand against the darkness in our world. Actually, there's something about the kingdom of God that is seen most profoundly in those small things, like a candle and a child and a young girl, fragile, powerless, insignificant, but the darkness can't, won't, never will overcome it. Saskia closed her video like this: while I'm here on earth, I want to be a light giver. I want to show people God's light. And so as we close, let me remind you of this, that the one of whom Isaiah says he is the light of the world, the one that the Gospels call the light that's coming to us, is the same one who says of you and says of me, you are the light of the world. Don't hide your light under a basket. You are the hope for a dark world. And in God's economy, somehow the smallest good can stand against the most inexhaustible evil. Somehow in God's economy, the only thing that you and I need to do to stand against that profound experience of darkness is just to be a light. That the strange, subversive way that Jesus' followers fight the darkness in our world and combat it and protest it and revolt against it and ultimately change it is simply to be a light. To be a light, however small and insignificant you might feel, the same way that Christ came to us as a baby who can't even hold up his own head. And in that promise is the fulfillment that the light will always overcome the darkness. And that's our Christian hope. As we close this morning, would you stand and let's sing together?